Break through the noise and see the world with a silver vision that highlights the beauty and the lessons in every struggle. We redefine digital storytelling by showing you the hidden side of life. Subscribe today and start seeing the world through our unique lens.
The moment I stepped off the plane, I felt it. That particular relief you feel after 14 months away, the kind that starts in your chest and spreads all the way to your fingertips. I was home. I was finally home. I pulled my carry-on through the terminal, already mentally planning my first real meal back in my own kitchen, a glass of wine on my own couch, my own bed. 14 months of hotel pillows and corporate apartments had a way of making you genuinely sentimental about thread count. I had left in August of the previous year to take a contract position with a financial consulting firm in Singapore. It was a 2-year contract, but I negotiated an early exit at 14 months because, honestly, I missed my life. I had built something good here. A condo I owned outright in a neighborhood I loved, a career I was proud of, and a family I thought I genuinely believed had my back. My name is Claire. I am 31 years old. I am a licensed CPA with a specialty in forensic accounting. I say that not to brag, but because it becomes relevant very, very soon. I had left my condo in the care of my older brother, Marcus. He was 34, between jobs for most of the previous year, and struggling to cover rent on his apartment across town. It made sense at the time. He would stay there, keep the place maintained, pay the utilities from a small monthly stipend I sent him, and have a stable place to live while he figured out his next move. I trusted him completely. He was my brother. We had grown up sharing everything. I did not think twice. I had also, before leaving, set up a limited power of attorney document for him, specifically for property maintenance purposes, allowing him to deal with any repairs, HOA communications, or minor legal correspondence related to the property. I want to be very clear about what that document said, because it mattered enormously later. It authorized him to act on my behalf for maintenance and administrative matters only. It did not authorize him to sell, transfer, or encumber the property in any way. My real estate attorney had been explicit about that language, and I had read every word. My condo was worth approximately $620,000 at the time I left. By the time I landed back in the United States 14 months later, the market had shifted slightly, but it was still comfortably in that range. I took a rideshare from the airport. I remember watching the city go by through the window, feeling that warm, specific joy of recognizing streets you know, the coffee shop on the corner where I used to go on Sunday mornings, the dry cleaner, where the owner always remembered my name, the little park 2 blocks from my building where people walked their dogs in the evenings. I got out of the car in front of my building. I typed the lobby code. The code did not work. I tried again. Nothing. I assumed it had been changed. Buildings do that occasionally for security, so I buzzed the front desk. The concierge came to the door. She looked at me with an expression I did not understand at the time. Polite, careful, uncertain. She said the residents in my unit had moved in about 6 months ago, and she did not have me on the approved entry list. I stood there on the sidewalk with my suitcase and I said out loud to no one in particular, "What?" She was very kind about it. She offered to call the building manager. I told her, yes, please, do that immediately. While we waited, I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. He picked up on the 3rd ring. He sounded relaxed. He actually sounded happy to hear from me, which, in retrospect, says something about his particular brand of audacity. I said, Marcus, I am standing outside my building and they are telling me someone else lives in my condo. There was a pause. A very specific kind of pause. Not the pause of someone surprised, but the pause of someone deciding how to play something. Then he laughed. He actually laughed. He said, yeah, about that. He said the market was good 6 months ago and he figured I would be happy with the number he got. He said he had been wanting to talk to me about it. He said he had been doing a lot of research into real estate investment and he had a plan for the money that was going to be way better for both of us. I asked him what number. I asked him what he got for my condo. He said $580,000. I sat down on my suitcase on the sidewalk in front of my own building. I sat down because my legs stopped working correctly. I said, Marcus, where is that money? He said, well, that was the thing he wanted to talk to me about. He had already reinvested it. He had put it into a venture with a couple of guys he knew. He described it as a ground floor opportunity, and it was going to triple in 18 months. He was sure of it. He said he had done me a favor. He said the condo was a depreciating asset in a tightening market, and this was a smarter play. I did not say anything for a very long time. He said, Claire, come on. You know I know what I'm doing. I thought about the fact that Marcus had been fired from his last 3 jobs. I thought about the $4,000 I had wired him 8 months ago when he said his car was being repossessed. I thought about every single time I'd handed him something and watched him burn it down, and then look at me with that expression, that particular expression that said somehow this was fine, somehow this was just how it worked between us. I said, "Marcus, I have to go. I will call you later." I hung up. I called my mother. My mother had known. I want you to understand that clearly because it is important for everything that comes after. My mother had known about the sale, had been present when Marcus arranged it, had said nothing to me for 6 months, and when I called her from that sidewalk, her first response was not, "I am so sorry," or "How can I help you?" Her first response was that I needed to calm down and think about this like an adult. She said Marcus had made a business decision. She said I had been gone for over a year and the market had been unstable and he was trying to do what was best for the family. She said I was being dramatic. She said that the condo was an asset and sometimes assets get liquidated and I should be grateful he got a good price. I said, "Mom, he sold my home without my permission." She said, "Your home that we all helped you with over the years. Your home that we treated like our home too." She said I had always been selfish about money and this was just proof of it. I want to be honest with you here. I sat on that sidewalk for a few minutes after I hung up and I felt something I was not expecting, not rage, that came later. What I felt first was a very cold, very quiet kind of clarity, the kind you get when something you half knew, something you had been pushing to the edges of your consciousness for years, finally has the decency to walk into the center of the room and introduce itself properly. My family had a pattern. I had been the one who always had the job, the savings, the plan. And for years there had been small things, a loan that became a gift, a favor that became an expectation, a boundary that got quietly relocated without my consent. I had let it happen because I loved them, and because I was good at telling myself it was fine. This was not fine. I picked up my suitcase. I checked into a hotel. I ordered room service. And then I opened my laptop and I went to work. Here's what most people do not understand about forensic accounting. It is not dramatic, at least not in the way people imagine. It is not confrontational or loud. It is methodical. It is pacific. It is the slow, careful process of following a paper trail until the paper tells you exactly what you need to know. I had spent 7 years doing this professionally, untangling financial fraud, finding hidden assets, reconstructing transactions that people had tried very hard to make disappear. My brother had tried to sell my condo. What he did not understand was that he had just handed me a case file. The first thing I pulled was the deed record for my property. Public records, available to anyone. What I found made me set down my fork and stare at the screen for a long time. There was a warranty deed filed 6 months prior, transferring my property to the buyer. The deed listed Marcus as the seller, acting under power of attorney on my behalf. The signature on that document was mine, or rather, it was meant to look like mine. I have a distinctive signature. I have had the same signature since I was 19 years old. This one was close, it was not good enough. The power of attorney attached to the filing was my original document, the one I had signed before leaving for Singapore. But the scope language had been altered. Where my document said maintenance and administrative purposes only, this version said property management and disposition, including the authority to sell, transfer, and convey. Someone had altered a legal document. Someone had forged my signature on a deed. Someone. And the notary stamp told me exactly when and where had found a notary willing to stamp the altered document as valid. I am a forensic accountant. I find fraud for a living. My own brother had committed real estate fraud using documents with my name on them, and he had apparently believed that because I was 14 time zones away, I would never look closely enough to find it. I want to pause here and ask you something, because I genuinely want to know what you would have done when you discover that someone you trusted completely has not just stolen from you, but has gone to the specific effort of forging legal documents to do it. What do you do first? Do you call them? Do you go to the police immediately? Do you call a lawyer? Tell me in the comments, because I think about this a lot, and I think the answer says something real about a person. What I did was document everything first. 14 days. I spent 14 days building a file before I made a single phone call to anyone except my own attorney. My attorney, a real estate and fraud specialist I found through a colleague, confirmed what I already knew. The power of attorney had been fraudulently altered. My signature had been forged. The deed transfer was void. The sale was legally invalid. The buyer, a man named Daniel, technically still owed money on a property he did not legally own, though his title insurance, which any competent buyer carries, would almost certainly cover him. I will come back to that. My attorney also confirmed that what Marcus had done was not a gray area. It was wire fraud, real estate fraud, forgery, and identity theft. It was federal. It was serious. And if my parents had known, if they had been present, had provided any assistance, had done anything that could constitute aiding, they could be exposed too. I thought about that for a long time. Then I made a decision that I do not regret, even though it was not easy. I called Marcus. I did not tell him what I knew. I told him I'd calmed down. I wanted to talk. I thought maybe he had a point about the investment and could we get together and discuss it. I told him I was in town and could he meet me for dinner. He suggested a restaurant. Nice place, actually. A steakhouse called Heron's, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a wine list that goes on for pages. He suggested it. I thought that was interesting. He wanted to meet somewhere public and upscale. He wanted a particular atmosphere for this conversation. I arrived first. I got a table. I ordered sparkling water and waited. He walked in looking better than I expected. New jacket, haircut, easy smile. He hugged me like everything was normal. He sat down, looked at the menu, and started telling me about the investment opportunity again. He had a folder. He had printed materials. He had clearly rehearsed this. He talked for about 8 minutes. He explained the venture, some kind of real estate development partnership with 2 other men, names I did not recognize. He explained why it was smart. He explained why my condo had been, in his words, an anchor. He said I should be thanking him for freeing me from a depreciating asset. I let him finish. Then I put my folder on the table. My folder was thicker than his. I said, I need to show you something. I walked him through it the way I would walk a client through it. Calmly, clearly, with documentation. The original power of attorney, the altered version, the deed, the signature comparison I had commissioned from a forensic document examiner, the notary's public records, and the bank wire transfer records my attorney had subpoenaed showing where the $580,000 had gone, including the $47 had gone. Marcus had spent in the 6 months before the investment, on a car, on a vacation to Cancun with his girlfriend, on dinners exactly like this one. The color left his face somewhere around the 3rd page. I said, Marcus, you forged my signature, you altered a legal document. You committed real estate fraud and wire fraud and you used my name to do it. He started with excuses. He said he had planned to tell me. He said the investment was going to pay back double and I was never going to know the difference. He said I was overreacting. I said, where is the rest of the money? The investment. How much is left? He looked at the table. I already knew the answer. The investment had failed 4 months in. The 2 men he had partnered with were running a scheme, not a legitimate development deal. Marcus had lost $490,000 of my money in a fraudulent investment, which meant he had also technically been a victim of fraud, which did not excuse him from being a perpetrator of it against me. I said, I have already spoken to my attorney. The deed transfer is void. My title to the property is intact. I am going to be in contact with the district attorney's office tomorrow morning. He said, you would put your own brother in prison? I said, Marcus, you stole my home. You forged my name on a legal document. You took $580,000 that did not belong to you and lost most of it on a scheme you did not bother to verify. And then you sat across from me in a restaurant and tried to convince me it was a smart financial decision. I said, I did not put you anywhere. You put yourself here. I left the folder on the table. I left him sitting there with his printed materials and his new jacket, and I walked out of Heron's Steakhouse and I called my attorney from the parking lot. The following morning, I filed a formal complaint with the district attorney's office. My attorney had already been in contact. There was a warrant within the week. Marcus was arrested on a Tuesday. My mother called me 17 times that day. I let every call go to voicemail. My father, who had been silent through everything, sent me a text message that said, you are destroying this family. I saved it. I forwarded it to my attorney with a note about the timeline and what my parents had known and when. Now, because I know exactly what you are thinking, because I read every comment and question carefully, let me explain what happened with the property and with Daniel, the buyer, because this part matters. Daniel had purchased my condo in good faith. He had a real estate agent, a closing attorney, and title insurance as any informed buyer should. When my attorney filed to void the deed, Daniel's title insurance company was immediately notified. Title insurance exists precisely for situations like this. When a property is sold via fraudulent documentation, the title insurer steps in to cover the buyer's loss. Daniel did not have to pay for the property twice. His title insurance company covered him. He was reimbursed for his purchase price and associated costs. My deed was restored. My condo came back to me legally intact. The $580,000, however, was largely gone. My attorney filed a civil judgment against Marcus for the full amount, which will follow him for the rest of his financial life. The likelihood of recovering the full amount in cash is low. It is not nothing, but I have to be realistic. What I have is my property back, a legal judgment, and a brother who is facing federal fraud charges. I moved back into my condo 3 months after I landed at that airport. The building manager let me back in herself. She said she was sorry this had happened. I thanked her. I stood in my living room for a few minutes and just looked at it. The windows, the floors, the particular angle of afternoon light I had thought about in Singapore more times than I could count. People asked me if I feel guilty. I want to answer that honestly. The first week after the arrest was hard, not because I doubted my decision, but because grief and justice can exist in the same moment. I grieved the version of my brother I had believed in. I grieved the family I had thought I had. Those are real losses. They do not disappear because you were right. But guilt? No, I do not feel guilt for following the law. I do not feel guilt for protecting something I built. I do not feel guilt for refusing to absorb a crime against me and call it love. My mother eventually stopped calling. My father sent one more text, 3 weeks after the arrest, which said, "I hope you're happy." I am not sure happiness is exactly the word, but I will tell you what I do feel. I feel like myself. I feel like a person who looked at something very ugly and did not look away, and who handled it with the skills she had spent years building, and who is standing on the other side of it with her name on her own deed and her spine intact. Marcus is awaiting trial. I have not spoken to him since the steakhouse. I do not know if I will again or what that conversation would even be. What I know is this. I left for 14 months and trusted the wrong person. I came back and found out what that cost. And then I did what I was trained to do. I followed the paper trail, I documented everything, I let the law work, and I did not let love be used as a reason to accept theft. My name is on that deed. It has always been on that deed. And now everyone knows it. If this story hit close to home for you, if you have ever had a family member use your trust as a tool, I want to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done? Where would you have drawn the line? And if you have been through something like this and come out the other side, tell me that too, because I think we all need to hear it. Please like this video if it meant something to you and subscribe to Maiden's Justice, because there are more stories here and every single one of them ends with the truth on the table. There is a particular kind of pain that does not announce itself loudly. It does not arrive with sirens or breaking glass. It arrives quietly in a parking lot outside a steakhouse after you have just watched someone you shared a childhood with try to explain away the worst thing they have ever done to you. That was where I felt it, not in the lobby of my building when the code did not work, not on the phone when my mother told me I was being dramatic, but in the silence after I walked away from Marcus and realized that the brother I had trusted was someone I had in some important way invented. I think about cause and effect a lot now. Not in a mystical sense, but in the plain, observable way that a forensic accountant thinks about it. Every outcome has a paper trail. Every consequence has a sequence of choices that led to it. Marcus did not wake up one morning and decide to commit fraud. He arrived there through a long series of smaller decisions, to take instead of earn, to lie instead of ask, to assume that the people who loved him would absorb whatever he could not carry himself. And I arrived at that steakhouse through my own sequence, years of absorbing, years of making excuses, years of letting love function as a reason to look away from things I should have looked at directly. What I understand now is that protecting someone from consequences is not the same thing as loving them. I thought I was being generous every time I wired Marcus money, every time I let something slide, every time I chose peace over honesty. I was not being generous. I was, without meaning to, helping him build a version of himself that had no practice with accountability. I handed him tools and called it kindness. He used them to build something that eventually came down on both of us. I also think about what it takes to act clearly when everything in you wants to collapse. Standing in that hotel room on the first night, with my suitcase still unpacked and a half-eaten room service plate on the desk, I had a choice about what kind of person I was going to be in the days that followed. I could have called Marcus back and negotiated. I could have let my mother's voice in my head, the one that said, "Calm down," that said family, that said you are being selfish, win. I almost did. I want to be honest about that. The pull toward denial is very strong when the truth is that painful. But I had spent 7 years building a particular set of skills, and those skills are, at their core, about refusing to let a convenient story replace an accurate one. That discipline, the habit of following evidence rather than emotion, turned out to be the most important thing I owned. Not the condo, not the judgment against Marcus, The habit of looking directly at what is actually there. If there is anything I would want someone to take from Claire's story, it is this. The qualities you build in the ordinary parts of your life are the ones that save you in the extraordinary ones. Integrity practiced quietly, in small moments, becomes the thing you reach for when the stakes are high. Courage is not a feeling. It is a decision you make, usually when you are tired and scared and the easier path is right there in front of you. And intelligence, real intelligence, is not about being the smartest person in the room. It is about being honest enough with yourself to see what the evidence actually says, even when you wish it said something else. Marcus made a series of choices, so did I. The difference between us, in the end, was which choices we were willing to make when no one was watching and nothing was guaranteed.